All right, welcome to the Quad Standards Labs at the Bench segment for the FPV Builders Newsletter. We're going to be contributing content in this way as well as some written articles to help bring all of your builds together and give you the most success possible in terms of having everything you need to be very successful and have a nice, clean, proper build that doesn't have any mechanical issues or any build concerns, to where you can get up in the air and really start flying and enjoy your quad rather than understand what's going on with it and trying to figure out what you did wrong. So, in this first segment, we're going to talk about a couple of key things that at the bench here at Quad Standard Labs we use on a daily basis. We've built over 100 drones in the last year and 2 or 3 months. Aside from that, qualifications that I have, background, I've assembled and built a complete assembly line for drones in the FPV market, and been responsible for projects that pushed out over 50 drones a week on average at times. I've been around the block, as you can say, in terms of how to build drones and how to do it consistently over and over again. So along those lines, this is basically everything that I use when I'm building builds, and not much else other than your basic things like soldering and things like that. But as far as tools to have that I like to recommend, first of all, we're going to start with the drivers. You always want to make sure you have a nice, good driver set. Not just your hex drivers, which you want to definitely make sure are nitride or some sort of really, really hardened material. Usually these gold material shafts will be the nitrides. Those are really awesome. I definitely recommend a couple of different brands. For one, MIP or Moore's Ideal Products is hands down number one driver set in the RC world or radio controlled world. I've had a set for years. This is not them, but I do have a set. I just don't have them at the bench here. These here also are some amazing drivers that I've used for quite a while. The prop driver in particular gets tons of action. That's one that you need. So you definitely want to make sure what you end up with is a 5.5 box. So this is going to be for all those 3mm nuts. It's a 5.5mm box. You're going to want a 4mm box as well. This is for your 2mm, your M2 screw nuts. So these will allow you to very easily access and remove any screws that are kind of holding your stack down, any frames that use screws. This is what you can use. Now, there is a couple of things to be careful with, and we'll go into that real quick. When you're using a driver like this on a stack, you got to be really careful of hitting components nearby. Always be really aware of where your driver is going to end up and how much slop it has. And just be really careful, and if you can, tighten it down a little bit and then use your fingers to tighten it down, or hold it from the top with your fingers after it's kind of snug and then come from the bottom with the screw. Either way, this driver is going to definitely help you out. So once you have your good drivers and all that, a couple of things that we're going to get into here are things that people don't really think about too much. Starting with, first of all, your wire cutters. Get a very nice, good pair of wire cutters, and do not abuse your wire cutters. When I say abuse, use them to cut wires, and only appropriate size wires for whatever type of cutter you have. These I can pretty much cut any wire we use up to a very large battery cable wire. That being said, I do have a larger pair or a more robust pair of cutters that I do prefer to use whenever I'm cutting kind of those thicker and more robust wires. So just again, use the tools for what they're meant to be, because what happens is you'll get nicks and cuts in the blade, and then it won't cut the way you want. It'll leave really small strands and other kinds of just bad cuts. These are kind of some of the ones that I use that are a little more robust for cutting thicker wires. You can see they're just a more kind of thick head on them. And then I have another larger pair. So from there, we're going to move on to a caliper. This is a really cheap caliper. I've had this caliper for probably 8 years now. It is not meant to necessarily be the most reliable and accurate. It's not a micrometer, which obviously if you're doing design work, you might want a micrometer. But for me, I have used this over and over again, countless times, for designing 3D parts, and more importantly, for measuring screw lengths. And when we get into another segment down the road and talking about frames and choices of frames and components, we're definitely going to need to look at the screw lengths and do some math between the thickness of the carbon, the thickness of the base of the motor, and what screw that means you need. So these calipers come in so much handy in keeping you from making mistakes. As well as if you do get into tinkering around like Tinkercad and doing 3D printing, having a pair of calipers is priceless. You got to have it actually. So before we get into these here, which are going to kind of be a little more show and tell, E6000, I don't have a full tube right now because I use it so often. This stuff is great. This stuff can be used technically to kind of waterproof if you want, but I don't. It has a tendency to lay really thin on itself. So what I like to do is I use this for making antenna connectors stay in place. So on DJI gear, we use it around the antenna connector, the MMCX, to kind of keep it there and make it to where it won't pop out. I use this on the bottom of quads on motor screws and on squirts and Cinewhoops that have ducts that don't have an upper screw for tightening. This will keep those screws from backing out and falling out mid-flight. It also will work on your UFL connectors and all of those other needs that you need something to hold something. It's high temperature. You can get it in clear. I use the black mostly. And it actually will peel completely off clean if it's like a nice smooth surface. I've pulled it off of GoPro boards even. So you have to be really careful not to pull other components off, but it will peel off if you do put it on something. So Tessa tape. So this is something that we learned about from a really great friend of ours out of Virginia Beach and or Virginia, and they build a lot of high-end, high-dollar equipment for a lot of different clients in DoD space and stuff like that. So this is wiring loom tape. It's basically the stuff that's in your car. A lot of exotic car or import cars actually have wiring loom cover like this. Some of the U.S. stuff has a little bit different version. But this stuff is really amazing. It's kind of fuzzy, and the point is you wrap your cables in any of your motor wires if you want or something like that. And when you have some chafing or it's rubbing up against a screw or the edge of the carbon, it's not going to break the silicone outer coating of the wire. So you're not going to have any tears or rips or anything. It's also really great because when you do it with a wiring loom the right way, you can actually tug on the wires and pull them through different areas. If it's you're trying to pull wires through somewhere, and you're not going to really pull on the wire, you're going to pull on the tape if you secure it right at the end. And this is kind of an example of what I mean. If I were to grab here and start kind of pulling this through somewhere, it wouldn't really be pulling the wire. It would be kind of pulling on the plug and the wire all consistently. So you can see here, like if you have motor wire and you're trying to pull them, let's say through an X-class arm, that's a big long tube, you wrap your motor wires in this wiring loom, and when you pull through, you're not going to be putting all that strain on the rubber coating, and you're also going to not get any nicks or cuts in there whenever you kind of pass it through. So this stuff is awesome. I actually have wrapped entire frames, like the entire exposed edges of frames in this stuff, and it is just ridiculous. This and gaffing tape are two of the most wonderful tapes on the planet, I feel like. Anyways, so Tessa tape. All right. So I'm going to get to the last two things, which are technically two groups of items. We've got tweezers and other types of kind of holding device, and then we also have some picks, so some dental picks, and then we also have this is a plastic pusher, is what I technically consider it. It's actually a thick zip tie that I cut into my pusher because for this video I couldn't find it. But this works exactly how I want it to, which is it's a nice sharp plastic tip. And I'm going to show you what these are for first. So picks are great for lots of different things. You can actually see on this one I've got a little bit of black E6000. I actually use this one to kind of take some E6000 off of a business card or just some sort of like area I put some, and kind of drag it around the edges of screws and put it in place and scrape it up and clean it up as it's drying. So that's a great reason to have this pick. It's a little bit of a larger one. It's got kind of a sharper edge on it as you drag it, so you can kind of scrape things. These are more rounded and they have some curved and flares to them. I use this one again. You can see this has black on it too, E6000. I do this for the screws too. But I use this to push bind plugs a lot of time on the air unit. I use this one to kind of hook some things if I need to. You got to be really careful not to push into anything or break any components off. But this is just great for those types of things. I will also use it if I get solder on something like metal, like this USB. If I get a little splatter, I'll use it to scrape it off. Now, if I'm gonna need to get splatter, if I get splatter somewhere else, like let's say I get a little bit of splatter right here between this OSD chip, the feet. Everybody that at least I did in the beginning that I know usually tries to use their iron and they try to pick up the solder. It's the worst thing you can do because it melts and then it spreads. Anytime you have splatter, what you really want is you want a plastic pick or a wooden toothpick or a wooden push pick, and you basically just pick it off. You just push it. Because solder that splatters is cooling in the air right before it hits. So that's why it typically forms a little ball or like a little ridge. It doesn't usually soak in or really connect to the metal pieces. And that's because the metal pieces are cold. And again, it's flying through the air. And by the time it hits it, it's just cool enough to where it just cools down and kind of sticks a little bit. So use something plastic or wood and be careful of your other components, but you should be able to flick off any kind of solder splatter. And so that's just a really great way to use these kind of plastic push picks. Also for pushing buttons, like, if it's not this kind of hard button, but that little small one that's on the TBS Nanos and stuff like that, having a plastic pick to push in is great because you're not going to really destroy it like pushing with one of these. If you push with one of these and push too hard, you're possibly going to destroy the little button and push all the way through it. The last thing that I'd say for using these picks that people don't recognize, wiring harnesses and rearranging wiring harnesses is something that a lot of people don't realize they can do. So they get a wiring harness and they say, oh no, it's wired wrong. I got to cut it and then resolder all the wires together. And that's the worst thing you could do. What you should do is use the tip of the pick or an X-Acto knife and you pick at the little tab and you lift up the tab on whatever wire you want to pull out. And then that wire comes out. And you can look at it and see how it goes in. It goes in with the flat back to the tab. And basically you can slide it back in where you want. And then you push that little tab down and make sure it's seated. And now it's locked back in. And so these little picks are really handy for this at the very least. This is something that I think I do 3-4 times a week and use these picks for. All right, so we'll finish up here with how important these are. They are probably one of the most overlooked items that people do not use. Tweezers and forceps, or I forget what they're called, but they're basically reverse clamp tweezers. These are awesome. These can be used in place of helping hands, wiring, like harness kind of vices, all different types of things. I use one thing, and it's this. So I'll show you an example. Making an XT30 or an XT60. I can use this, clamp it just like that, and now it is solid and in place, and I can come in. And if I had my solder and my soldering iron, I could come in and I could work on it, right? It's going to hold it there. I could then take my wires and I could insert them. But before I even get to the wires, I have to tin the wires, right? So these wires are technically already tinned. I just did this. I can use these forceps and again, hold them up just like this. I can hold multiple wires. I can put them all the way down here. I could do a whole run of wires. And again, I can use my soldering iron and my solder, and now I can tin all my wires. So these reverse action forceps, I got them on Amazon for like $5, $7, something like that. Almost just, again, priceless and so underutilized because you don't have to have this big stand that's just like reaching over everything. And I just don't like any of that type of big, stuff on my desk. So the next thing is going to be your tweezers. So you've tinned the wires and now you got to connect them to your board. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to use your tweezers and can pull those over into the position. Now, I have my big fat fingers here, and sometimes I get lazy and I do it this way. And sure, I can place wires this way. A couple of things about that. One, your fingers get really hot really quick if you know are soldering kind of incorrectly or just really close and the wires are really small, and so that causes you to move and flinch and you splatter and all kinds of issues. You bridge and you connect different wires. And then the other thing is it's just cleaner. It makes your fingers aren't getting all up in there. You're not all up in the way of the build. So you use your tweezers, and I use these angled tweezers, and you can just literally put it where it goes. Use your soldering iron, and everything's good. It goes in place. It's just such an easier. I mean, look how quickly and easily I can put that exactly where I want, rather than grabbing it and making sure. Oh wait, back my fingers up. Oh, okay, and then oh wait, I'm over. Okay, there. It's clumsy and it's just not the way to do it. So I hope you see that these are the tools that really make building over and over again, whether it's once or just over and over again like we do, easier and just more successful. With these types of tools, you're going to make sure that your builds are nice and complete. They're going to be safe. They're not going to fall apart. You're not going to have wires shorting out because they got torn. Just lots of different things that we covered here that are going to make you much more successful. Thanks again to the FPV Builders community, and check us out at quadstandardlabs.com, and I'll see you next time at the bench.